Hey guys, so this is gonna be a personal one, and today I want to talk about what it means to be a good person. So, a lot of what I'm about to share comes from the philosophy that I understood as part of learning martial arts, and I'm gonna talk about it in keeping with Carl Jung's concept of the shadow. The reason I was interested in this topic is because I think a lot of us tend to confuse being good with being nice. And of course, being nice is often associated with being weak or naive. But I think there's an important distinction between the two that I'm going to try to outline through this video. So, to start off, I think it's important to deconstruct what it means to be a good person. And being good does not mean being weak or harmless. And it's also not the same as being naive or not having the capacity to hurt other people. Being good is a choice that we make. It's a conscious decision, and it often takes a lot of strength and courage to be a good person. Being good is to be perfectly aware of the many reasons to be bitter and resentful, to understand that people can be malevolent and have evil motivations, and that there can be valid reasons for those attitudes. And then to have the knowledge and willingness to accept that we too can be possessed by those forces because they are real archetypal forces that have existed for a very long time, and the people acting them out are real human beings, and so are we. So we're not necessarily immune to those forces, but it's not something to be afraid of. And I think this is the point where I should probably shed some light on my history. So some of you might already know that I was bullied as a child, and I'm not gonna get into too much detail because I've already shared parts of my story in one of the previous videos I made on personal responsibility. But long story short, I experienced bullying growing up, and eventually I learned martial arts. So once I learned how to fight, I made sure that no one around me ever got bullied again. But one of the most important things we learn as part of learning any form of martial arts is the emphasis they put on meditation. And the idea behind that is when you walk out of here, you're going to be a dangerous individual. So you need to learn to regulate your emotions first. And that's because it's important to be powerful and to have the capacity to be a little bit of a monster. But perhaps it's even more important to have it under control. The underlying philosophy is being aware of our ability to be dangerous is better than not having the ability at all. Because unless you've come to terms with your own capacity for evil, you cannot confront it when you see it in someone else. And we also see this to some extent in phenomena like the theory of deterrence, wherein between two countries who are both nuclear powers, there are less chances of an actual war. And that's because both countries are capable of causing so much damage to the other that in the case of an all out war, there can be no real winner. And we can also observe the same in crustaceans and birds and wolves and various other species, wherein they have very sophisticated methods of sizing up to each other. And the reason they do that is to avoid actual combat, which could prove deadly for one or both the animals involved. So it's the same principle operating at the level of global superpowers and all the way down to relatively simple creatures like lobsters. So, the point of learning martial arts is not only to fight, but to prepare yourself in a way such that if you ever find yourself standing across a genuinely malevolent or predatory person, you can respond with confidence and let them know that there are going to be serious consequences of messing with you. And the implicit idea is that because you can fight, you won't actually have to. But you need to grow some teeth to begin with so that you can bite when necessary. I think that's also where the shadow comes in, and the shadow is basically everything we conceal, even from ourselves. So, this includes all the parts of us that we find to be ugly or flawed, or anything that we're ashamed of, which we feel the need to repress. It was originally derived way back when human beings first became capable of conceiving the idea of sin. But anyway, I'll leave a few links in the description for those of you who are interested in reading more about it. Personally, I would say a big chunk of my shadow was aggression. And that's because growing up, I witnessed a lot of violence and crime and drugs and all sorts of things that no child should have to see. And I didn't want to replicate any of those same patterns, but through my teenage, I was put in situations where aggression, although for the right cause, was necessary. Of course, I didn't want to accept that I have the capacity to hurt other people or that I can be dangerous. In fact, even when I would beat up a bully, you would often find me crying somewhere alone in a room afterwards because I wanted to dispense away with the reality that I can be a real monster. But as I matured, I think that brought me to a rather crucial realization, which was that aggression, when properly channelized to achieve positive things, can be quite useful. And there's nothing immoral or unethical about using force as long as you're in control of your emotions and as long as you choose to be a force for good. And the reason for that is once you recognize yourself for the monster that you could be, being aware of the fact that you can be dangerous is what actually makes you act in a civilized manner and what makes you virtuous. So, being good is anything but the same as being weak or naive or harmless. Being good is to develop your inner monster carefully and consciously because unless you integrate that part of your personality into the broader whole, you're even more dangerous than you would be if you were aware of it. So, I would say that it's necessary to be dangerous, but then, and perhaps even more importantly, to have it under control and to be civilized. So, you're dangerous yet civilized. You have the ability to use force, but you only use that force when absolutely necessary. So, stand up for what is good and stand up for what you believe to be your truth. Rest assured that it makes you a better person, not a worse person. Be kind, be generous, but don't forget to develop your inner monster because unless you've acknowledged the darker side of your own true nature, and unless you come to terms with the snake that lives inside your own heart, forget about being a good person because you're not even a complete person yet. Being good is to realize that all the terrorists, rapists, and murderers that we hear about, that could be you and it could be me. It's a real possibility given enough corruption, pessimism, the feeding of lies by our society, and the willful ignorance, or worse, the acceptance of those lies by the people. That could happen if we aren't careful and if we fail to pay attention. But we don't have to go that way, and we don't need to be afraid of that thought because we have a choice. And the choice that we collectively have is to be a good person in our own personal lives given our unique individual circumstances. In the words of Carl Jung, the thing of importance is not the shadow, but the body which casts it. So choose to be a good person. Integrate your shadow.